Okina semdol kake mofaseda.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to Talking in Stations, a show all about talking about EVE Online. Glad to have you here. Today is Season 2, Episode 11, and we are talking about the Council of Stellar Management 14 race and the candidates. And we have a little bit of advice for them from current and recent CSM candidates who won't be moving on to 14. So they have some great advice for you today. First, I'll introduce myself. My name is Carneros. I'm the CEO of The Bastion, ex-CCP dev, so I have sat in the CSM rooms on the opposite side of the table before. And then with me, I have my co-host, Elise Randolph from Pandemic Legion, also ex-CSM. Say hello.
Hey, yeah, and I was actually one of the people on the CSM while you were working for CCP, so I was on the other side of the table. It's pretty good.
It's great to still see you on the other side of the table. And we have two famous guests with us today that I'm excited to introduce to you also. First, we'll start with ex-CSM, ex-CCP dev, Celine. He is the CEO of Body Count Inc., famous previous CEO of Mercenary Coalition, now in semi-retirement in Pandemic Legion. Say hello, Celine.
Hello, everybody. I was one of the guys sitting across from Caneros during the fun times on the CSM back in the Incarna days and such. So, yeah, it should be fun to.
Great to have you here. And then also a little bit more recent CSM experience, still on the Council of Stellar Management 13. We have a famous streamer, famous solo PvPer, and PvP expert in FC, Sutonia from We Form Volta.
Yeah, it's good to be here. I was on the 12th and 13th CSM, and I was also in one of the focus groups, the Tactical Destroyer focus group specifically. So I've mostly spent the last 3 years sort of talking with CCP about balance-related stuff.
Excellent. All right, thank you very much. First, let's start off with a little context setting. Today is the last day to file your paperwork to be a candidate for CSM 14. If you're not used to EVE Online, if you've been playing other games, you may have heard of some of these council type things before. EverQuest has had one for at least a dozen years. But EVE's is the only one that is elected by the player base. And that's a big deal and has huge ramifications on the shape of the whole thing. So they get reelected every year. We're coming up on CSM 14. Players need to fill out some paperwork today with CCP, give them a copy of their passport, various things that they have to do, rigmarole. And then they're going to post on the EVE Online forums in a place that we all colloquially refer to Jita Park. I don't know if our producer, McLeod, can put that up on. He's always one step ahead of me. Thank you. And people will post in here, and you should go and read these. They're amazing. There'll be an initial post by the candidate declaring their candidacy, and then there'll be some supportive and less supportive comments down below it. The assumption is each candidate who posts has a thick skin and doesn't take this too seriously. And then there are third-party sites that are. How do you get your stuff onto? What's the other one called?
I know Noisy Gamer collates everything from the from people posting in Jita Park, and I think that's for the longest time that's been the go-to resource for a lot of people.
Well, CSM Wire is a fantastic site, very helpful. I used it all day yesterday preparing for the show. So yes, it's super helpful. There were a number of last-minute folks getting their paperwork in yesterday and today. So I don't actually have the most recent count, but I'm going to quickly take a look at it.
Yeah, I was actually doing a similar thing. I was going through the CSM elections and going through all the threads and everything. And at the same time, I was also like on another screen watching some A&E documentary about about basically cult. And yeah, it was a good time. It was a good time.
But
Not much overlap.
the last number I had heard yesterday when I went to bed was 39, but we might be higher now. I think the record might have been 46 candidates. A Noisy Gamer, if he is around, will correct me on that. But yeah, we'll probably get pretty close to it by the end of the day today.
Yeah, and for reference, there was 46 candidates last year.
Okay, 46 last year. I do notice that if I look through, I made a spreadsheet because this is EVE Online, and I made check marks for which candidates had served on a previous or current CSM, which ones had declared themselves to be a fleet commander and FC, which ones seemed to be focused mostly on nullsec, wormholes, lowsec, highsec. I also put a blended category because some people don't fit well into any one piece of space. And which ones had some kind of tie to media in some way. And it's interesting to see. There are a fair number of high-sec candidates this year, more than I would have expected. There were 10 yesterday that I saw looking through it. Now, there are still as many nullsec-based candidates as wormhole, lowsec, and highsec combined, which probably doesn't surprise anyone.
Yeah, the nullsec guys are really, really organized, and they all kind of realize how important the CSM is and the vital role that it can play.
Well, I do still remember when there was the big change to jump bridges years ago that kind of galvanized some of the nullsec people to wake up and smell the coffee. And they had wished they had somehow been able to tell CCP in advance that this is a bad idea.
Yeah, exactly. I think it was around CSM 5 or CSM 6 where a lot of the nullsec groups were like, hey, this CSM thing, maybe it's not just a crappy popularity contest. Let's throw some people on there to make sure that we have a voice.
And over the years, CCP has begun to use the group slightly differently. It's evolved over time, and I think that's a healthy thing. And I believe it will continue to evolve going forward. CCP doesn't build the game the same way today that they did 16 years ago. And I imagine 10 years from now, they won't be building the game the same way they build it today. And the CSM will need to evolve as that goes. Do any of you want to jump in and say a few words about how the two groups work together? Any misconceptions people might have?
Celine was like the chair of CSM 7, I think, right?
Yeah, y'all stuck me in there. But I mean, in terms of the way it worked, it's just evolved so much from what it was. I mean, in the very, very beginning, a lot of people probably don't even realize that it was, at least in my opinion, a fairly reactionary thing that was formed due to certain events that had happened in game. And CCP took the then kind of revolutionary step of showing how they were going to be a little bit more beholden to their players than other online games. And, it had a few false starts in the beginning, but over the course of a few iterations, it got, it rose in prominence. And I think that in the early days, the main thing in the minds of the players was to kind of make sure that CCP was doing things fairly for all involved, for everybody that was playing, to make sure that nobody was getting an unfair advantage against one group versus another group. And then I'd say about the time that CSM 5 through 6, 7 rolled around, it started to become more of a less about, okay, is one side have an unfair advantage, and more along the lines of, okay, how can we make sure that the game as a whole evolves to be fun for everybody? But once again, instead of being able to, go forward with some of that, CCP was still trying to jump ahead in what they wanted to try to have the game do. Instead of it just being about spaceships, they wanted it to be about 3 or 4 other things at once as well. So I'd say up until about maybe around CSM 9 or 10, the CSM's primary goal was kind of trying to help CCP save them from themselves. And I think that the people involved did a fairly good job of that, considering the fact that that they're still alive today. And from what I've seen of the last few CSMs, I'm kind of jealous of the rapport that the elected players and the company have now, because the more recent versions of the CSM seem to be, at least from the outside looking in, a lot more refined and a lot more focused on really trying to see, this is where we want the game to be in 6-12 months, and what can you guys do to help us, and what suggestions do you have? So, it's been through a lot of changes over the years, and I would like to think that it's improved over time, definitely.
I remember when I worked for CCP, there were some things that we felt like, this is too early to show the CSM yet. It needs to get farther along. We need to be able to answer some questions about it. We need to give it a little bit more polish. And then there were other things that were projects that were way at the beginning that we said, let's run this past the CSM first before we do any development effort on it. Just vet the idea itself, with the caveat that the idea might change as we go. And I remember vividly one such thing I think I presented to both of you too. That was a terrible, terrible idea. And you guys very gracious, the whole team very graciously, very politely, very supportively explained why it was a bad idea and how people would react to it. And we said, okay, and locked that and put it away and threw out the key and never talked about it again. Never thought about it again. But we won't talk about what it was, because I would get thrown out of the Imperium.
But yeah, it's I've got a similar view on Selene. It was I think I'd say CCP started taking the CSM a little bit more seriously. I think around CSM 4 or 5, and it definitely was formed as like a reactionary thing. But what people have to understand is how seriously CCP took it. They had a guy whose literal job was just or running the CSM. That's all he did at CCP. He didn't have any other functions. He didn't do anything else. It was just that one guy, and he actually had a team member with him. So there were actually 2 guys. The team member did other stuff too, but just imagine that, a dedicated employee to working with a player organization, just to make sure, or a player advocacy group, I guess, to make sure that everything was running smoothly. So ever since the inception of the CSM, most people have said like, oh, it's a popularity contest, and nothing gets done. Or they go on to the other side of the pendulum and they say, oh, it's that gives too much power too much information to the players, and they're just super corrupt with it. But no, I think it's a really good thing. It's very unique in gaming. I know a couple other games tried to copy it. I don't think anyone's copied it successfully. But it's a neat experience, and it gives a good kind of feedback as a player and as like the developers. As Carneros was saying, like sometimes you have to put more polish in an idea, because you're like, oh shit, how do we answer questions about this to players? And that's like, I think that's a really important step when you're developing something, being able to like kind of look back at it and say, oh shit, we have to talk about this. How does this idea just hold water even before we have to present it to somebody? So it's a neat thing. I'm glad it's around. I am actually really, really glad at the current crop of people running for CSM 14, because I was worried after the whole Brisk thing like 2 weeks ago, that people would be like, not for me. I know Commander A's was one of those people who was like, yeah, I'm not touching this. But looking at the people on CSM Wire and just the Jita Park forum, there are a lot of incredibly talented people running. And just a lot of big names too, which I didn't necessarily expect. So that's good. That's always a good thing that the people have faith in the CSM as well.
I just want to throw one thing out about when the CSM was originally getting established. I was still working at CCP, and one of the biggest internal debates initially was whether or not players would have to reveal who they were in real life. And that was a massive thing in the beginning, because the decision was made that due to NDAs and everything else that they would have to. And those first few CSM runs, I remember there being all of these discussions on the forums about how I would, but there's no way in the world I'm going to let people know what I really look like and who I really am. And I don't know how much that has changed over the years, but Elise's comment with regard to what just happened recently with Brisk, I think is kind of a serious reminder that this is definitely not for everybody, depending upon what your real life job is, and how, if you intend to behave or not, or any number of factors that might come into play.
Yeah, and someone in chat, SBR 3000 Blackout, asks, instead of the CSM, why don't they just ask player feedback in polls? And they sort of have done this, and I think Sutone can give a little bit of more insight into this. For a while, I think 3 years ago, they started the thing called focus groups. So they had a Tactical Destroyers focus group, Capitals focus group, and another focus group that I can't remember, where they just invited high-profile players that they knew used these certain ships, and kind of made like a mini CSM on just one topic for it. Sutone, what was the Tactical Destroyers focus group like?
It was pretty good, actually, and I think a lot of the suggestions that we had in the chat after it got worked out and discussed between us, it did get postponed for about half a year or so, but eventually I think a lot of the ideas that came out from that, putting the DPS on sharpshooter mode and a few of the other suggestions, really made the ships in a lot better place than they are now.
Yeah, I was in the Capital focus group, and I have to say there was, at the very start, the first 3 days, there were some incredibly good ideas, people talking about the big failings and the successes, and then after that it just kind of devolved into people yelling at one another for having different views. So for the Capitals, I think it probably wasn't the best focus group, but for the Tactical Destroyers, and I guess the Strategic Cruisers as well, that was the other one, they seem to be a little bit more successful, but there's still a lot of noise. And that's something that the CSM, just by virtue of its size, is pretty good at eliminating, is just extra noise.
Yeah, the other aspect of it is also sort of the NDA aspect of it too. You can't just poll the entire player base, do you want us to do this new experimental new feature, because then it's going to leak to all of the competitors to CCP, and then they can investors can see where CCP are putting their money and all this kind of stuff too. So I don't think you can really have some super wide public polling system. And also, if you go into a fourth grade classroom and ask the kids there if they want to eat McDonald's for the next 30 days, they're all going to say yes, but that it's terrible for them. So it's that kind of stuff too.
That's the best analogy to EVE players I've ever seen or I've ever heard of. Fourth graders and McDonald's. That's about right too.
Yep.
I just wanted to say that I was really glad whenever I heard about the focus groups kind of coming back, because one of the, as I was saying earlier, one of the things that the CSM was originally came into being for was because there were portions of the player group that were just convinced that one side was cheating and the other side was cheating, because they had, and I'm going to date the game out of myself here, they had devs on MSN Messenger. So there were groups of players a long time ago, 12, 13 years ago, that were high profile, that CCP would talk to kind of through back channels about what was going on and how did this work and how did that work. But when, scandal hit and the CSM started to become a thing, that was one of the very first things that got axed, was all of these back channels talking to players. And it became a very specific thing that the CSM was like the place that you would go through the players for a long time. So somewhere along the line, I was really happy to hear that CCP had lost their, had gotten rid of being gun shy about engaging, other groups about other specific topics. So I'm really happy to see that the focus groups, regardless of how useful they may or may not be in some times, that they're happening at least.
As someone who has done focus groups at various companies, you can get different information based on the size of the group. If it's a big group, you get different quality of information and types of things than if it's a small group. If it's a persistent group versus a temporary group, the level of personal responsibility and identifiability of the people, in the group is different too. If they're at a distance talking to you over the internet versus in front of your face in the room with you, you get different quality of information. If you've got someone from the team working on that feature there in front of them, it's different from if you have an unrelated dev presenter who's presenting more neutrally in front of them. Those all affect it. But there's also one thing I want to point out too about what makes the CSM a little bit different. If you're sitting in the room with them presenting things, they speak up and ask questions. I've never seen a CSM meeting be stone silent, just listening to you present and then raising their hand at the end to ask a question, which is exactly what it's like for the EverQuest version of this. If you go present to that group, they sit there quietly and wait and listen and hear everything you say, and then they raise their hands. And in the meantime, they're sipping coffee and eating muffins and things and just enjoying your hospitality. It's a very different feeling than CSM. What do you guys remember of your CSM meetings?
I remember there was so I don't know if it's still like this, but the CSM internal forum, I remember posting literally just pages of shit. Like there were only like 14 of us back then. Well, there were 14 of us back then, more than there are now. And we'd get to like 13, 15, almost 20 pages of forum posts, which is like, 400 posts or something, which is absolutely ridiculous. Like we'd get all the way over there for a lot of things. And then we'd have our own little organization channels in the background where we kind of organized ourselves to get on the same page before approaching CCP. So we didn't have like 10 different voices yelling at them in different ways, because that's not really a good way to go about anything. So, I mean, when it came to the meetings, there were a few where we kind of all looked at each other and were like, this is something we didn't expect. But for most things, we're all always wanted to like chime in and put in certain input.
One of the things that sticks out to me specifically about CSM6 was that we were the first group that decided to actually have like a big joint chat channel. And at the time, but there was no Discord or anything, so there was no Slack. So we had a Skype channel. And up until that point, I guess people used the in-game chat or TeamSpeak servers, I don't know. But we set up a Skype channel specifically for exactly what Elise was talking about, to kind of get to everybody on the same page, strategize, so that way we could speak with one voice to CCP about a particular topic. And it was kind of neat, because that was also the first CSM where you had, I think probably a majority of the people were nullsec players. So they were a bit more used to that kind of high-level organization, and it kind of became normal from that point forward, and it evolved to where we eventually had a team of devs, and then a couple of other ones in separate Skype channels as well to talk through issues with. So it wasn't just forum stuff as well, but yeah, it was an evolving process, and I was glad to see that we were able to help improve the efficiency of it a bit.
Okay, I have a question for Suetonia. Back when the three of us were all on doing CSM stuff together, we would go out each night after the meetings in Iceland, and we would go have dinner in a restaurant. And that was my favorite part, We'd go have dinner somewhere, and then we'd go drinking somewhere after that. And you can get a certain difference. Formality, it's less formal. You get a different kind of rapport, a different conversation. It's super helpful. You can dig deeper with someone who made a point in the meeting that you thought was interesting, and you can do it off the record. That was cool. Are they still doing things like that in CSM 13?
The entire CSM actually normally eats all together, like all 10 of us, and then we normally invite like 3 or 4 devs to come to dinner with us, and then we still go out drinking. One of the things that was actually super useful this time around is we had an induction day sort of thing on the Saturday before the CSM. Basically, instead of like the year before, we had a boat trip where it was just like a team building thing, where it'd be like, like the CCP devs that directly deal with the CSM, and then 1 or 2 people who were invited from CCP, and then the CSM on a fishing boat trip. That was this winter. Whereas the new thing we did the last CSM summit is basically we just took that budget and CCP just put it as a bar tab in the bar under CCP, and we just had a big meetup where like all the devs could just come down and just grab a beer with the CSM, and it was super useful actually. It was probably it was super fun too.
Yeah, they give that little incentive for the devs to come down and talk to you, and then realize, oh, these guys don't bite and they don't suck. That's great.
Yeah, it's amazing what a beer does for motivation.
It definitely pays to know what is the subject that you want to raise officially in the meetings versus what would you like to save to try and talk to this dev or that dev kind of offline, because sometimes you'll get better results with different approaches. And I think that that's definitely a key aspect of knowing how to be sociable in that respect if you're going to do this.
Just as an aside for a moment, I want to have a big thank you to Xylix Xenix for gifting 5 tier 1 subs in Twitch chat and saying Happy Mother's Day all. Yes, Happy Mother's Day indeed. By the way, our normal host, Matterall, is away today, celebrating Mother's Day and a birthday with his wife. Otherwise, he'd be here with us, and he's with us in spirit. He's probably actually listening in chat, even though he's not supposed to be. But thank you, Matterall. That's why I'm filling in for him. Sorry to distract us all from that, but that was a big bombshell there in the Twitch chat. I had to say that. And welcome to the new people who are finding us for the first time.
And I think that's like the 4th or 5th time he's gifted a bunch of subs as well. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. All right, so looking back at my list of questions on this. So what was maybe a least favorite aspect of the serving on the CSM for you guys? I know for me, it was the fact that we spent hours and hours and hours in one small room with very limited ventilation, and it could have been a lot more comfortable, but unfortunately we had limited conference rooms at CCP, and you couldn't just take. We gave the best one basically for the day, but none of them were fantastic. What did you guys think?
I mean, go Sutone.
Okay. I'd say like not being able to play Eve while you're at the CSM summit is kind of bad. I mean, I don't think a laptop that can play Eve, and like sometimes when you just like spend like a day talking about it, you really get the itch to play it again. The other thing that kind of sucks too is like not being able to sort of do the speculation and talking about like, oh, what is CCP doing with this? This thing just appeared on Hobo Leaks. What is this? And you can't really participate in that because you kind of know what it is.
Yeah, I think for me, my least favorite thing was like having the element of surprise removed from me for like 2 years. So I kind of always had an inclination of what was coming up next, either from them directly telling us or just from the direction things were going. And so there was like in a space game that at the time, and we're talking like 7 years ago when I was on the CSM. At the time, Eve was like just all about the great unknown and trying to figure stuff out. Basically, everything was spoiled for me. So I guess that's probably why PL is really good at spoilering people now, just because of that. And I think the other thing that Sidonia has mentioned, not being able to play Eve while you're at the summit, that didn't bother me so much. But the fact that it took like, I'd say like 20 to 30 hours a week out of how I would normally play Eve. And back then I was like super nerd active, so I was playing all the time. So there were like fleets I couldn't lead or ops that I couldn't go on because I was like, oh, I got to tell this guy on the internet my opinion about some space stuff that might never come to light. So I think that was like my least favorite parts, but that's why I only went for 2 terms. And I think that's probably why most people go for 1 or 2 terms. Except for the crazy people like
Steve Renuke,
Jintan, Steve Renukin, Trevor. Those people are just nuts. So they go on for like 4 or 5 years.
I was going to say that I think that one of the frustrating things about being on the CSM, especially if you've been a former dev as well, is seeing how the sausage is made, and not so much. Elise is right. There's parts of the game that get spoiled, but in terms of actually being on the CSM and getting frustrated, I think that by far the worst experience for me personally was being in a room and discussing a feature set or some aspect of the game that you could tell that all of the devs in the room were not 100% enthused by, or you'd ask a question and, well, they didn't really know exactly how that was going to work, but it's going to be great. And you start looking at each other like, do these guys know what the fuck they're doing? And that was terrible. And that did happen from time to time. And that makes you feel good because you're thinking to yourself, well, hey, it's a good thing I'm here. And then you find out, a month later that I thought that we talked about all this, and then you went ahead and did this dumb thing anyway. That was frustrating. Luckily, though, for the most part, those moments were less than, the more positive aspects. But it definitely did and probably does continue to happen from time to time.
We turn and look at Sutonia.
That was kind of a subtle question, wasn't it?
That's fine. He's not saying anything. We won't pick on him. All right. Did you learn anything from the other CSMs while you were there?
Yeah. It's always fun talking to some of the other CSM members, especially like Arif is is someone who like knows everything when it comes to like trading and like the Eve economy and all of this stuff, which is super cool. It's also nice to like learn about ship balance from someone like Killer B, who does like more of the like 200-man fleet kind of stuff rather than like solo and like small gang balance. Just as like 2 examples.
Yeah, I always had a good time learning about how like the other group of people play Eve, because at least this was true for me. I don't know if it's true for everyone else, but I was pretty much adamant that I was playing Eve the only good way that you could play Eve, which was as like a Nomad Alliance in nullsec. I was like, I beat Eve. This is how you're supposed to play. Everyone else is just doing it wrong. And then when you meet other people that play perhaps differently, you get a better appreciation for just how wide open the game is. And so the CSM, you can kind of get that a little bit. But where I got that sensation quite a bit was at like my first Eve Fan Fest, which I went to as the only reason I went at the time was because they were like, oh, if you go to FanFest, the ticket's free. I was like, okay, I'll go to Iceland, whatever. Seems good. So I flew to Iceland. I got to do like the little CSM thing there. And ever since that time, I went to every single FanFest afterwards, and then also every Eve Vegas afterwards, because I was like, hey, this is actually fun. I thought it would be crappy, and I didn't know what to expect. But these events are fantastic. And it's really nice to meet people behind like their space personas.
And then you learn that this guy that you really, really hate is actually a nice guy. Fuck, I don't know if I want to shoot this guy.
Exactly.
back when the like KOD was a thing, like the Corporation Alliance and Organization discussions, like forum, where there was just like awful posts there every day. I met like one of the most like prolific ship posters in real life, and then he was like some doctor who like does a bunch of stuff for charity. It's like, oh god, I just hate his post so much, but he's like such a nice guy in real life.
Yeah, that's a real bad feeling because you're like a lot of Eve. It feels like, especially when you get to the more like PvP aspects of it, a lot of it seems to be predicated on hate, like hating the other guy across the screen. But it's really, really hard.
It was easier 10 years ago to hate. Now it's just, you know everybody. Damn.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
You can still hate them in space. You just can't hate them in real life.
I know. It's funny. It's you end up waving to them in local at the same time you're shooting each other's fleets. It's all you could do.
Yeah. One of the kind of the best things that happened to me on the CSM wasn't actually the CSM itself, but it was getting involved in like the kind of a little bit more involved in the community, especially like the podcasting and the article writing community for EVE Online, which is literally the reason I'm here today. I wouldn't have thought of doing an EVE podcast because I was like, I've got nothing to contribute, and what a podcast do anyways. But then when I was on the CSM, they're like, oh, hey, this guy's on the CSM. Do you want to be on our podcast? And I was like, okay, I like talking about EVE Online. Might as well. And it became quite addicting too.
I learned about podcasting when I left CCP, really. It wasn't until at that point the world opened up for me for what I could do to play the game. I left EVE University and went out into the real world. And my friend John Smedley from Sony Online, from Amazon Game Studio now, he loved podcasts and he thought they were the best thing. He doesn't sleep very much. He's one of those guys that just has more time to spend on playing games at home or podcasts or things because he just sleeps so little. So he said to me, you got to leave EVE University and come out to Nullsec. There's this podcaster with a great vision. I don't know how his corp will be yet, but he's got a great vision for it. You should join it with me. So that's how I got mixed up in the Bastion, in a previous version of it under a different name. But yeah, that's how I learned about podcasts.
That's quite a good way to get pulled in. Just have like a super high up in the game design industry or the games industry being like, hey, why don't you just play with me? And it's a pretty neat story to have.
Oh, it was fun. Oh yeah, absolutely. We wandered in, and the first thing that happened to us was we gave all of our stuff to the jump freighter pilot to jump into Pureblind, who immediately got tackled when he arrived and blown up, and all of our stuff was floating in space around the dead jump freighter. And we looked at each other and said, well, okay, this is an authentic EVE Nullsec experience. And then he and I poked each other and bought some Plex and sold them in Cheetah and donated the money to the Corp to buy another jump freighter for the Corp. And the CEO's jaw dropped. And then after that, he paid attention to us too. Up until then, we were just two new guys, and he didn't know who we were, and we were nobody. Fast forward a couple of years, and I'm his XO, and fast forward a couple more years, and he steps down on this stuck with a CEO job. But yeah, these things happen. Podcasts. So one of the things that's different today for CSM 14 than it was back from 5, 6, and 7 is how much work goes into running a CSM campaign for Office now. First, it's more competitive now because there are only 10 slots instead of 14. Just as a reminder, can I ask our producer McLeod to put up the slate for the CSM 13 graphic so we can see who's on CSM 13. I like catching him while he's, busy. Okay, there you go. So you can see that's 10 members right there. Sutonia's picture's up there, although you don't recognize him in that outfit. His hair has changed. Just kidding. So you know, I'll say them for the podcast audience who are just listening. Steve Renukin, Merkel Chen, The Judge, Brisk Rubal, Yin Tan, Inominate, Sort Dragon, Killaby, Aerith, and our Sutonia here. So that's the 10. That's tight competition. If we've got 46 running for those 10 slots, that's going to be tough for this one. And some of these folks have declared that they're running again from CSM 13 to 14. Not Sutonia, but...
Yeah, I believe everyone is rerunning with the exception of me, Yintan, and Brisk.
Okay. So depending on how much an advantage that you think the CSM 13 status gives your CSM 14 campaign, which is probably substantial, you may only think of it as 3 slots that are really being opened.
Yeah, and of those, there are even people that were on previous CSMs that are not even CSM 13, but like CSM, like some of the earlier ones. I know Zenuria is running, Mike Azaria is running. So it's gonna be really, really tough to fit in there. And you have some huge names running as well from like these large groups. So obviously you have all the Goon ones and the Imperium ones that are still running. You've got Villy, who's thrown his hat into the ring.
He's so famous. You might think he's been on the CSM before, but he hasn't. I don't think he's ever run.
I think this is his first time running, and I'm actually kind of glad that there's going to be some sort of FC representation there, because it always seems there are like these certain little pockets that you definitely need to fill. Sutonia has filled like the ship's expert and like fitting expert type like role really well. I think he's been the best person to have ever done it. And there's someone who's kind of running on a similar platform. And there's always been some sort of FC type person. And I think Villy will be kind of a throwback back to when some of the big name FCs would run. I mean, Killaby also was on the CSM, so he's a pretty big name FC. So, but he's not running again, I don't think.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Killer is running again or not. I think he's kind of undecided, maybe, because he seemed like he wanted to at one point, and now I don't. Like, if you're not sure, then I don't know. But I'm pretty sure he is running.
Is there anyone or any group in EVE that you're surprised that doesn't have a candidate that they're running with?
I would say the Russian community not really having a candidate like the past 2 years is a bit strange. And now that they've kind of like re-merged together in the new coalition that they have, the final reunion coalition, maybe they will. The votes might be a little more concentrated, and there might be like a Russian representative. There's also interesting is like how many Chinese players we have now on Tranquility. I believe last year Fraternity wasn't they were able to vote, but I don't think maybe they hadn't been playing on TQ maybe long enough to sort of be comfortable having a CSM candidate of their own. But now maybe they will. I mean, Salt Dragon kind of represents the Chinese, the Asian time zone though, so that's kind of where I think they put their votes last year.
I'm always surprised that Pandemic Horde hasn't run anyone. Sorry, Kronos, I didn't realize I was talking about.
Oh yeah, yeah, you're right, no Horde.
Horde has never run a candidate, as far as I know. Like they're like this group where they can get like thousands of votes easily, and they never really run a candidate.
I think they had didn't the CEO run like Kaib? I'm not sure. Like I can't say his name properly. It's like Kaib S something ran for CSM 12. But he got eliminated like right at the end, and then all of his votes went to Yukiko Kami, which is how Yukiko got elected onto the CSM. It's like Brave and Horde put each other as like number 1, number 2, respectively.
Well, that's really cool. I like how the STV kind of works like that.
And now you've got Dunk Dinkle for Brave this year. And, he's a famous person. Yeah. Also, in the category of very famous people running, I'd like to mention our normal host, Matterall, who's away today. He threw his hat into the ring. He filed all his paperwork today.
Yeah, that's going to be a pretty big. He's running on like a community type platform and stuff like that. So that's going to be pretty big.
I think we have
the biggest surprise I think is going to come from like where are the votes that voted for Brisk, me, and Yin going to go to, because we're the candidates I'm not running, and we're also kind of like sort of like the outside candidates as well. We're not really like we don't really represent coalitions all that much. I know that Brisk and Jin were both in sort of Providence and Imperium kind of with the initiative, so maybe there was a bit of like block votes going into them, but like all three of us generally are sort of more of the independent candidates, I would say. Like, I think a lot of the votes that Brisk Rubel got were sort of his like phenomenal campaign last year, and like he definitely had, I'd say, like the populist vote, kind of like Rylode had the year before. And like I've got a lot of the like independent sort of votes from like Twitch and YouTube and people who vote for like the small gang solo PvP kind of thing. And Yin Tan also kind of has like the reputation of being like a great communicator. So that's kind of where I think the biggest surprise might come from, is that there's like the core votes that come from the us three that are not running. Where do they end up going to?
Yeah, it's going to be really contentious. I wouldn't be surprised if we kind of increase the number of people voting this year compared to previous years. Like I've just got this feeling that there's going to be an increase in voting, and I also do hope so, because the CSM seems to be working a lot better when there's more of a varied opinion in there. But yeah, so Matterall's running, Manic Velocity is running when it comes to big names. Dunk Dinkle's running, Villy's running. It's just, I'm just shocked at the amount of like huge names that are kind of throwing their hat into the ring and willing to do it. And that's, as Suturni was saying, there's a lot of people coming back as well. Do you guys have like a dark horse candidate that you think might like, maybe we don't know too well, but maybe might make some moves?
Well, from my community, I guess you have Stitch Caneland, who's kind of like a semi-famous PvP guy who posts like a bunch of videos of him in battleships. He's like really famous for using torpedo battleships like Ravens and Typhoons and Barghests and solo PvPing with them. And like he's quite well liked, sort of, in the public space, like on Reddit and on the EVE Online forums and on YouTube, and in the Bringing Solo Back community. There's also Insidious Sainthood, who's like another sort of well-known PvP player who's running again. So I feel like they're probably going to get like a bit of support from the channels that most people normally don't look at.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. That's good to hear. And I knew Stitch was running, but it kind of like didn't dawn on me. So that'll be good to see him running. Kind of reminds me of like a Mr. Hyde type campaign. And he got on quite well, not easily, but he got on. And before him, like Prometheus Saxenthal, he was on for a CSM term as well. So like that, there's a lot of room for that type of player to get in. I also think Cable Uta can kind of like sneak his way on kind of quietly as well. He's like a guy from Volta who he's one of the Thera boys. So that'll be kind of good representation. And of course, for other wormholers, I think everyone from the wormhole community is trying to rally behind Exuki, who's run before. I'm not sure if that's actually true or not. Or if
he ran last year. He was actually I believe he was the 12th person to be eliminated as well. So he got pretty close. Like only TikTok got more vote. Like TikTok was the person who was eliminated in the final round, and he was the only person who got more votes than him. Well, I mean, he was the next in line basically.
Yeah. So I mean, there's quite a lot of man, it's going to be really hard to get on this. I do not. I do not envy any of these people who trying to want to get on the CSM.
Oh, I think Tristan DeCuna as well. I just like refreshed the CSM page to look at like names that I kind of know. He's
from
like
Dirt and Glitter, yeah.
Yeah. He's kind of like a meme candidate, but like he basically just plays like factional warfare all day. He's been like in the FW for like 8 years or something. So there could potentially be like a lot of votes from like the FW community coming his way.
Yeah, the factional warfare community has gotten a candidate on before, Hans Jagerblitzen. They rallied behind one guy and just like mass voted and shoved him on. So it's possible.
He had the coolest name, though. I mean, he really did.
Yeah. Do want to encourage people to use their vote fully, meaning that you've got the single transferable vote system. Don't just put your first favorite candidate on. Fill out your vote as best you can and help some of these people who are going to be challenged here with all this competition.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, if you look at the voting statistics from last year, there's a lot of people who voted for like one of the Russian wormhole community people who was in Inner Hell, or wormhole outlaws at the time. They're in Inner Hell now. They got something like 500 votes, and like there's a big like section of votes. I think like over 300 votes went to them with like no candidate put into number 2. And if they had like Azuki in, I believe that there's a chance that Azuki would have got elected, because like if you look at like TikTok's votes as well, if TikTok got eliminated before Azuki, there was like another like 200 or so votes that would have gone onto Azuki. So like you should always fill out the rest of the ticket, because there would have been a wormhole candidate last year if the wormholers did.
And it just goes to show that it's not all dominated by like certain blocks, right?
No, it's not. People think it is, but it's not as dominated as it looks. All right. I want to point out too that the last show of this season, the last show of season 2, is going to be the Sunday before voting ends for CSM 14. So we're probably going to come back to this on our season finale and talk about this a little bit. Looking forward to that. This is our last chance to wind up here a little bit on the subject of CSM before we go over to any news of the day in EVE Online. Do you feel like people are going to need to have a fancy video like Brisker Ball did last year in order to compete in this field this year?
Man, I think it certainly helps, right? Like to get, I know what Trevor did is he literally just emailed every single person in JITA. Like he just made this little, I don't know if it was a script, but he made this little program to like record everyone coming in and out of JITA over the course of like a month. And then he just emailed all of those people on election day or like the day before election day saying, here's the link that you have to click to vote. And if you want to vote for me, click on this other link before, and then you don't have to do anything else. It'll just put me at the top. And that actually worked for him. Like, it's amazing. Like, there are so many people, like, we're in this like little small bubble, right? Of like, oh, we know all these CSM candidates. We know what the CSM is, blah, blah, blah. There's basically the majority of the game have no idea what the CSM is or just doesn't care at all. So just anything you can do to get the word out will definitely help the campaign.
Amen. Okay, we'll move on now to some of the news of the day in New Eden. One thing that, there were a couple of spectacular losses in the last 24 hours. Oh, dear Lord. Did you just see that? Cluster alert shut down. They're going to restart Tranquility.
Yeah, Eve connections have been down while we've been on air. So it happened like 5 minutes before we went on air. I guess it was just CCP's way of saying, hey, you should probably call your mom to say Happy Mother's Day, because we're just going to kick you off of Eve.
Nice. Okay, well, we got that coming up. So you're not missing anything if you hang out with the show right now. We did have. I was going to link a couple of spectacular losses. There were, if you think of them in terms of cost, they're only about the cost of a super carrier. But one of them was a beautiful officer fit Ninazu in a wormhole yesterday. That I don't know if you saw that one. Dear Lord, my pilots were gasping when they saw it. Beautiful, beautiful ship. And then there was I think it was a Caldari shuttle today with a whole bunch of large skill injectors that got blown up by a smart bombing Mauler.
And the loot fairy said yes. It's just everything dropped.
Yay! Yeah, go get some skill points, folks. What a mess. People, you don't need to do that. That's not good, Eve. Don't do that. Anyway. But yesterday there was also a fireside chat. There actually is one every Saturday. It's not that big a deal. The Imperium get together. If the Matani's in town, he'll get up and say a few words. If he's out of town, it'll usually fall to Merkel Chen. Love Merkel Chen. And then, but he got stirred up a little bit. The Matani got stirred up a little bit before yesterday's fireside. And I'll tell you what stirred him up. Captain McLeod, could you put up the screenshot of the pie chart for us? This pie chart got tweeted out by CCP Pellegro. And it's, CCP players, EVE players love statistics. We love looking at stuff like this. When it has people's names or group names associated to it, we sometimes find that very interesting and compelling, and we stop and look at it. Anyway, this wound up the Matani because it didn't have Goonswarm on there anywhere. And he got all wound up, and he dropped into a few chat channels, including the public channel on Talking and Stations Discord. And he got all riled up, and people responded to him. And we all, the team here, the crew at Talking Stations looked at each other and said, should we let him go wild for a little bit? And they said, yeah, let him go wild for a little bit. If he goes too far off, we'll stop him. But just, he doesn't drop by that often. Let's see what happens. There was a lot of scroll back later. Some of it very colorful.
And to put this pie chart into context, it's since 2004, 2006, the number of people banned and what alliance they were banned from. There's really nothing else. It doesn't say why they were banned or anything like that. It's just like a bans per alliance for the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah, could have been anything. Anyways. So, but you never know when one tweet from CCP is going to trigger a metagame reaction from the players who are, emotionally invested in this game and sometimes crazy. Not saying that the Matani is crazy. I'm not allowed to say that. But then, Fireside Chat comes yesterday, and he's all riled up. If you're deeply interested in the subject, somewhere there's a link floating on the internet that will give you the recording of the chat from yesterday. My buddy Ron at Test Alliance listened to it, so I know it's out there. And TQ is shutting down in 15 minutes anyway, so you got time to go listen to a fireside if you want to. I never go to Reddit if I can help it, but there's probably a link there somewhere. Anyway, he basically said, that's it. We're planning a war. So all of the busy bees in the beehive are running around planning a war, pun somewhat intended. But because it's such a big group, it takes a while to do such things. There's no such thing as, I'm going to throw 20 things in my jump freighter and 10 things in my carrier and I'm ready to go. No. Those days have passed. So
and I think this is something that they've been kind of inching, or the Imperium's kind of been inching towards, but they finally get their reason to invade, right? They finally get the grand narrative of these guys called us botters. They were the real botters all along. Let's go get our apology or something like that. So that should be fun to see. Eve is always more entertaining when it's at war, and especially goons have a good way of making a war very, very impassioned.
I'm looking forward to it. There's probably going to be a big meeting where he gets up, and they usually call it the State of the Goonion type thing. And it doesn't just involve Goon Swarm itself. It'll be the whole Imperium that gets stirred up on that. And they'll do a big thing and then get us all riled up. And then we'll probably just start undocking waves and waves of ships and making horrible tie-dye and going somewhere together while jumping up and down and, drinking beers. It'll be crazy.
So that should be, and that wasn't the only like the big news that came today or this week either. There's been like some pretty huge things coming along, especially as we're inching in towards summer, which is usually kind of like a bit of a down period. But it seems a lot of stuff is going on. I know the Chinese community coming over from Tranquility coming over from Serenity to Tranquility announced that they're going to be creating their group in Omist, and they're going to be there's like a joint statement put out by Legacy Coalition, those in Tappy, and the new group coming in, and they're like, Legacy's giving us Omist, and we're going to kind of build up our power there, and blah blah blah. There have been a lot of pretty funny memes that my favorite, and this isn't like a serious thing. It's just one of my favorite memes is that Legacy is now blue to more groups on Tranquility and Serenity combined, more than anyone ever. So that was a pretty fun one. But no, it's good to see groups like extending the olive branch and seeing how how significant a massive group coming in can be. I know when Wind Spirits moved over with Fraternity, PL and NC pulled out all the stops to make sure that they had like a place to go, and just it just makes a lot of sense. These guys could be a huge strategic ally, and it makes sense for Test Alliance, which is kind of born as a bunch of newbies going off and doing crazy stuff together and like conquering parts of the map when they have no business doing so, showing the ropes to like a similar group of new players.
All right, any other big news of the world?
There was the kind of Sword Dragon kind of made some noise, and it does play kind of play into this whole botting thing. I remember there was a fireside chat probably maybe a year ago or so that the Mittani got a lot of flack for. And someone had asked, he was in the Imperium and said, hey, if we know someone that's suspected of botting, what do we do? And the Mittani's response was something like, you don't go and just accuse someone of botting. That's not your job. Blah, blah, blah. Like if you think someone's botting, you just leave it alone and let someone else take care of it. And he got a lot of shit for it. Like that's when people were like, oh, the Mittani condones botting, blah, 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 blah. And that's not at all what he was saying, right? Like I was one of the few people that like defended him on this one. He was basically saying like, hey, it's not your job to create this like little lynch mob of killing botters or people that you suspect of botters, right? Or of botting. Because, there's always drama over anomalies and stuff like that, and whose space is what and which ore is whose and stuff like that. And just being able to say, yo, we're coming on and we're going to make like our own little list of botters, that creates a really toxic environment. And that's something that Guardians of the Galaxy, or Dead Coalition, as some people call them, experienced this week as well. One of their groups had made like a list of suspected botters in their space. And they had like this really offensive name they had this public spreadsheet and they had like a really offensive name for it. And Sword Dragon was like, oh, these guys are racist, I'm going to kick them out. And he got slapped in the face for it, right? The public reaction was, oh, Sword Dragon loves botters more than he loves actual useful alliance members. And I think he phrased his post probably badly, which is something Sword Dragon does habitually. But it was just like a group that went a little bit too toxic, and created this little echo chamber where they thought it was fine, but it kind of crossed a line. At least I feel like it crossed a line. So I don't necessarily blame Sword for what he did. I think he messaged it really, really poorly, though. But he ended up kicking out like a huge member of his alliance or of his coalition, and his coalition is like a lot weaker for it now.
Yeah, it was Slice, I think.
Yeah, it was Slice. There was like a group in Slice. It wasn't just like all of Slice.
Oh, it was the leader, I think, it was Riot Rick, or at least one of the main FCs of Slice, who was actually the owner of the spreadsheet, apparently. So I think that's why they got kicked. I think Slice had dwindling numbers, so they had their space given away to some of the new Chinese alliances that had joined Deadco. And so I guess there was maybe some drama there where like Slice were getting, they've lost ratting space. So, and they at least believe that the bots are taking up that space. So they've maybe decided to, cause a bit of drama and got kicked.
But yeah, and that's exactly the type of thing that the Mitani's message way back when was like trying to avoid. It wasn't saying, yo, we condone botting. It was like, hey, if you take it upon yourselves, you're going to start ripping each other apart. And then who knows what's going to happen. So, yeah. So that definitely is something that the Dead Coalition experienced and Sword Dragon had to deal with. And he just pulled it out at the root, as Daenerys Targaryen would say. So Slice is gone. They gave away or transferred a bunch of citadels in VFK as they were leaving because they had some Fortizars and Astra Huts in VFK. So it was like, hey, if you want this, just post in this thread, and we'll just transfer you this citadel so you can go and make Dead Coalition's lives miserable.
Did you sign up for one, at least?
I wanted to, but I was like too late. I just wanted to have it so I could put a Game of Thrones spoiler on it to just
see how you are.
Well, because his coalition is based in a different time zone, right? So I have like this 9-hour advantage on them. So that was going to be my ploy, but it didn't end up working out.
Yeah, the real matter is to put in a fake spoiler.
Yeah,
that seems like it could be real.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I would do. I did one not too long ago. And I kind of like copied it from CC Carker, who after the latest Star Wars movie posted Yoda dies, and a whole bunch of people were like, "Why would you ruin this movie?" And like without even thinking. So that one's my favorite.
I love her. CCP Carker is a gem. Okay. Any other news or anything else? Otherwise, we're going to go over to our shoutouts.
I'm sure there's more stuff that we probably missed, but those were like the big ones. It just
wasn't there like
big
some
news that kind of like
some big capital feed yesterday. I saw like a lot of caps died to like NC dot and skill yourself. I'm not sure if that was like a fight. It was like Blood Demons Alliance. I just saw like a big like super page of carriers that just popped up. I'm not sure if that was like relevant at all.
They probably forgot to turn off their NSA. What do you call that thing? Network sensor array. Just kidding. That was a joke.
it was good. It didn't need explanation. It played. Don't worry.
All right.
But yeah,
it does crack me up that these people basically scram themselves with that from time to time and forget.
There was a mass test on Tuesday, which was testing the 64-bit client, and it worked a lot better than the last mass test. The 64-bit client, I think CCP Antiquarian announced it, that the test server is going to be running the 64-bit client for like the next month or so. So if you want to get on and play with it, you can definitely see that.
Nice.
I I had a good experience with it on the first test, but it also used like 14 gigs of RAM, and it was just trying to take more and more and more. This one was a little bit more conservative in how much RAM it took, and I was able to run 2 accounts, and it seemed to be running fine. But it's huge in what it could potentially mean for these big fights that we as caps players tend to get ourselves mixed up in. Like the ability to play, the ability to not be on super ultra potato mode. Like for the medium fights, you can actually just be on like normal mode, which is quite nice. And you can just download more RAM if you get stuck, so that's fine.
Plus, I know that the Talking in Stations is hoping to live stream some of the big battles and interesting stuff. We're gonna ask the Matani if we can live stream the next State of the Union if there is one. We'll see what he says.
At the very least, you can live stream like the stream of ships that are undocking, as you were talking about, like everyone leaving and going, like deploying to the war zone.
Yeah. Oh, look who showed up. I'm gonna drag him into the channel. Maybe hope he's not AFK. Good morning, Matterall. Welcome to your show. How you doing?
Sorry. Hey, I just wanted to say great job on the news, you guys. This is what I mean. You guys run this a lot better than I do, and it's actually nice being a fan.
Thanks for coming by. I hope you're not getting in trouble with your wife for doing this.
No, I did my Mother's Day and birthday duty, so I just got back from that and have like about a 45-minute gap before the next thing. But thanks, Carneros, for taking over and doing such a great job.
It's an honor.
Although I have to say, it's kind of easy when you have Elise and Suetonia on.
Yeah. Yay. And Celine's with us too. Thank you very much, guys. Yeah, no, this is a fun, easy podcast. We didn't have to discuss something horribly divisive and painful. No, we got it easy this time.
Well, listen, I just wanted to say it is official. I have put in my paperwork last night, and so I am, I think, in the running, although there's no confirmation that it all got filed properly. We shall see. But there it is. Under. So I'm going to hang out. What's that? Eve Down Under?
Eve Down Under is where CCP is going to reveal the final list of candidates for CSM 14 and who made it through their screening, etc. And get people riled up to vote, hopefully. If any of the rest of you have a way to get people riled up to vote, go for it.
The best way is just to tell someone that they shouldn't rise above their station.
I think that works pretty well. Who was it that said that? Who coined that?
Oh, it was Mr. Hyde in Reload's CSM campaign thread on the EVE Online forums, and then of course that got a lot of support for Reload, obviously.
I hope those of you who are connected to Tranquility are getting your ship safe right now, because it's about to close.
So the server's going down. Do we know for how long?
No, but I was actually surprised that they were like within a minute of it going down. There was like a little message on the launcher, and there was a message on the forums as well, saying, "Hey, we're aware of this." Blah blah blah. But yeah, it's someone said in chat, it's Eve, so no one knows how long it's going to be down.
They're trying to troubleshoot something.
Some of the hamsters had to go say Happy Mother's Day and end up getting eaten by his hamster mother. So they got to get a new one. And that's what hamsters do, by the way. That's not just me making a weird joke. Hamsters do sometimes eat their young. The more you know. I learned about this when I was 8 years old and had a hamster for a pet. Turned out to be a pregnant hamster. And it was mortifying.
That would be traumatic. So, Carneros, I just want to say I'm going to hang out in public if people want to come ask me questions and stuff like that. I don't know if people need to because they probably have heard me say things about everything already. But all this campaign, I'm going to try to do AMA wherever I go, and even on the chill streams and stuff like that, if that works out.
Excellent. Yeah, good luck, Matterall, on your campaign. Good luck to all of the candidates doing this. We recognize it's a super competitive race. We're looking forward to more cool videos like Brisk made, and I'm just putting pressure on you, Matterall. And like Sullen and Manic Velocity did last year. I don't know if you remember Sullen Desmus.
Oh, that was a great one. Yeah,
it was like it was
all the way.
fun.
All the way back to Eva Jobson or Jobs. Remember her? She did a couple of campaign videos.
Yeah, it's weird the things that you remember from this game. I remember her videos with like the Mini Cooper somewhere in Amsterdam, and I was like,
yeah,
okay. And then that's just seared in my memory from
my
15 years ago.
Forgotten about that. That was amazingly bad.
Yeah, she jumps out and poses in front of the car, and it's like.
Yeah, I don't remember the last 4 digits of my phone number half the time, but I remember perfectly.
Well, we'll try to match that quiche or catch.
All right, shout outs. I want to shout out to Xylix Xenix for being so generous in Twitch chat. Thank you again, sir. Or ma'am. Sir or ma'am.
Oh, I just want to shout out my mom, who is the best. She doesn't really know much about EVE Online. I got her the Frigates of EVE book one year, and it just sits on her coffee table, and she doesn't do anything about it. But she knows it exists. She watched one Alliance tournament match, and it was a match that I died in. And so she was like, it must be bad luck, so I'm never going to watch it again. So either she thinks I'm terrible at the game, that I devote like my summers to, or she honestly just thinks she's bad luck, and it's like supported me by not trying to jinx me. So that's good. My mom's the best.
I'll give a shout out to Streamfleet running the Streamfleet Showdown tournament this weekend. It was all offline, unfortunately, because there were some issues running the tour on the Thunderdome server. But they've been still recording the matches offline. It's really cool that the Streamfleet are, still encouraging like tournament play on TQ.
Yeah, and you can actually watch the videos. They're posting them on YouTube and putting in commentator stuff like after the fact. It's actually technically really difficult. There's already the first weekend's already up there. If you look at the I should probably find the YouTube things. Oh, there you go. There. Nice. Production level 100 right there. So you can watch the matches, and more matches will be going up this week. I know Yintan has been he's been getting like pairs of commentators and analysts to commentate on the videos as they become available. So a good reminder, Sitonia, good reminder.
I'd like to give a shout out to Dunk Dinkle, who I'm going to completely take credit for his run for CSM, seeing as how I told him to at EVE Vegas this past year. So Dunk, good on you. I'm looking forward to great and amazing things from you. And also to Happy Mother's Day to Daenerys Targaryen, who has had a rough time, but she's still a mom, and everyone should love her, even if she does go fucking batshit in tonight's episode.
So PL. All right, thank you. Matterall.
Yeah, I have a shout out, even though I just jumped on at the last second. It's not really fair. But I want to say thanks to Carneros and McLeod for putting the show together and doing a great job with it. And Elise and Sitonia and Celine. I didn't see you here at the beginning. Great job doing the show. It actually works really well watching it as a fan. So I think that's pretty cool. And I want to say this shout out goes to everybody who's made the trouble to apply for CSM, because it's now just ending. This is the last day to join in. And all the guys that actually went through the trouble to do it, guys and girls, or guys and women. So good luck on all the campaigns, especially the guys from Talking In Stations. Good luck, guys.
Take us out. Take us out. And thank you guys. Thank you all for coming.
You kind of sounded like Picard there.